The stars had never looked so cold. Captain Nadia Okonkwo stood at the observation window of the ESS Defiance, watching the distant points of light that humanity had dreamed about for thousands of years. Those dreams had become reality centuries ago when the first human ships left Earth and ventured into the darkness between worlds. Humanity had found that they were not alone. The galaxy was full of life, full of civilizations far older and more powerful than their own. Most of those civilizations served the Vexari Dominion. The message had arrived 3 hours ago. It came on all frequencies, in all languages, impossible to ignore. The words were simple and direct. The Vexari Grand Fleet had entered the Sol system. Earth had 72 hours to surrender unconditionally. All military vessels would be destroyed. All weapons would be confiscated. Humanity would accept permanent status as a labor species within the Dominion. There would be no negotiation. There would be no exceptions. Nadia was 53 years old. She had served in Earth's combined fleet for 31 of those years. She had fought pirates near the outer colonies. She had negotiated with alien traders. She had seen things that would have seemed like magic to her grandparents. But she had never seen anything like the images now displayed on every screen aboard her ship. 2,000 warships. Each one was larger than anything humanity had ever built. The smallest Vexari cruiser was 3 times the size of the Defiance. The largest, the flagship of High Sovereign Terex himself, was a moving mountain of metal and weapons that could have swallowed a small moon. Against this force, humanity had 300 ships, 300 against 2,000. And even those numbers lied about the true difference in power. A single Vexari battleship could destroy a dozen human vessels without effort. Their shields were stronger. Their weapons were faster. Their technology was 8,000 years more advanced. The math was simple. Resistance meant extinction. Lieutenant Commander James Adeyemi, Nadia's first officer, approached her quietly. He was a tall man with kind eyes that now carried nothing but worry. "Captain," he said, "Earth Command has called an emergency session. All senior officers are ordered to attend remotely." Nadia nodded without turning from the window. "I expected as much. What do you think they will decide?" It was not a question Nadia wanted to answer. She had seen the reports from other conquered worlds. The Vexari were not cruel in the way humans understood cruelty. They did not torture for pleasure or kill without reason. They were simply efficient. Conquered species were processed, categorized, and assigned their function within the Dominion. Those who resisted were eliminated. Those who cooperated were allowed to live as servants. It was not death that the Vexari offered. It was something worse. It was the end of everything humanity might have become. "I think," Nadia said slowly, "that they will argue. Some will want to fight. Some will want to surrender. And in the end, they will probably try to negotiate, hoping to buy time that we do not have." Adeyemi stood beside her, looking out at the same stars. "Is there any hope at all?" Nadia did not answer immediately. She thought about her daughter, now grown and living on the Mars colony. She thought about her mother, still alive at 91, still tending her garden in Nigeria. She thought about the billions of human beings who were waking up this morning to learn that their entire species had been given 3 days to accept slavery. "Hope is a strange thing," she finally said. "It does not depend on odds or calculations. It depends on what we are willing to do." The emergency session began within the hour. Nadia watched from her ready room as the faces of admirals and generals appeared on her screen. They looked tired and afraid, though they tried to hide it. Admiral Chenwei, the commander of Earth's combined fleet, led the discussion. He was 70 years old, a veteran of every major conflict humanity had faced since leaving Earth. His voice was steady, but Nadia could see the trembling in his hands. "The situation is clear," Admiral Chen said. "We cannot defeat the Vexari fleet through conventional means. Our only options are surrender or destruction." General Kowalski of the European Defense Force spoke next. "What about evacuation? We could scatter, hide our population across the outer colonies. The Vexari would find them." Admiral Chen replied, "They have done this many times before. They know how conquered species think. Running only delays the inevitable." The arguments continued for hours. Some officers spoke of honor and defiance. Others spoke of survival and practicality. A few suggested desperate measures. Weapons that might cause damage, but would certainly invite total retaliation. Nadia listened without speaking. She had not been asked for her opinion, and she was not sure anyone wanted to hear it. She was just a patrol captain, commander of a single cruiser that meant nothing in the greater calculation of forces. But as the hours passed and the arguments circled without resolution, she felt something building inside her. It was not hope exactly. It was something harder and colder. It was certainty. Near the end of the session, Admiral Chen finally noticed her among the gallery of faces. "Captain Okonkwo," he said, "you have been quiet. Do you have something to add?" Nadia straightened in her chair. "I do, Admiral." "Then speak." She took a breath. What she was about to say would sound like madness. Perhaps it was madness, but she had spent 31 years learning how to fight, and every instinct she had was screaming the same message. "The Vexari expect us to surrender," she said. "Their entire strategy depends on it. They have conquered over 4,000 worlds across 12 species. Do you know how many of those species actually fought them?" Admiral Chen frowned. "I do not have those figures." "None of them," Nadia said. "Not one. Every species the Vexari have conquered saw the odds, calculated the outcome, and chose to submit rather than die. The Vexari are not prepared for an enemy who fights anyway." General Morrison of the North American Command shook his head. "With respect, Captain, fighting them would be suicide." "Yes," Nadia agreed. "It probably would be. But suicide and surrender both end the same way. The only difference is what we leave behind." Admiral Chen leaned forward. "Explain what you mean." Nadia stood and walked closer to her screen, as if she could somehow reach through it and grab the attention of every person watching. "The Vexari rule through fear," she said. "Not fear of their weapons or their ships, but fear of their reputation. Every species in the galaxy believes that resistance is impossible. That is why no one resists. But what happens if we do? What happens if a small, primitive species looks at their armada and attacks anyway? Even if we lose, even if every human being dies, the idea survives. Resistance is possible. The Vexari can be hurt. Other species will see it. Other species will remember." The room was silent. Nadia could feel the weight of their attention, the mixture of shock and dawning understanding. "We have a choice," she continued. "We can surrender and be forgotten, or we can fight and be remembered. Our children might die either way, but only one choice gives their deaths meaning. Only one choice gives other species the courage to follow." Admiral Chen sat back in his chair. His face was unreadable. "You are asking us to sacrifice humanity for an idea." "I am asking us to be human," Nadia said. "We are the species that climbed out of caves and reached for the stars. We did not do that by calculating odds and accepting limits. We did it by believing that some things are worth dying for. If we surrender now, we betray everything we ever were." The arguments continued after that, but something had changed. Nadia could see it in their faces. The possibility she had raised was terrible, but it was also real. It offered something that surrender did not. It offered a reason. 2 hours later, Nadia received a private message from Admiral Chen. She was to report to Earth Command immediately. A shuttle would be waiting. She did not know what to expect when she arrived. The halls of Earth Command were chaos, filled with officers and officials rushing in every direction. She was escorted to a secure chamber where the High Council had gathered. These were the leaders of humanity, the men and women who would decide the fate of their entire species. Admiral Chen stood as she entered. "Captain Okonkwo, the Council has a question for you." Nadia stood at attention. "Yes, Admiral. If we decide to resist, if we reject the Vexari ultimatum, what message should we send them?" Nadia looked round the room. She saw fear in every face, but she also saw something else. She saw people who were tired of being afraid. People who wanted, more than anything, to believe that there was still something worth fighting for. She thought about her daughter, her mother, every human being alive. Then she gave her answer. 3 words that would change history. "We will attack." The silence that followed Nadia's words lasted only a moment, but it felt like an eternity. She stood in the center of the High Council chamber, surrounded by the most powerful leaders humanity had ever known, and watched as her 3 words landed like bombs in their minds. "We will attack," she had said. Not "we will resist," not "we will defend," Attack. Admiral Chen was the first to speak. His voice was careful, controlled. Captain Okonkwo, perhaps you do not fully understand the situation. The Vexari fleet outnumbers us nearly 7-1. Their technology is thousands of years beyond ours. If we attack them, we die. Yes, Admiral, Nadia replied. If we surrender, we also die. Just more slowly. The question is not whether we survive. The question is how we are remembered. Chancellor Martinez of the United Earth Council rose from her seat. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and gray hair pulled back in a severe style. Her reputation for cold calculation was legendary. Yet when she spoke, there was something new in her voice. Something that sounded almost like curiosity. Explain your strategy, Captain. If you have won. Nadia had spent the entire shuttle ride to Earth preparing for this moment. She had run the numbers 1,000 times. She knew they were bad. But bad numbers were not the same as impossible odds. And she had learned long ago that battles were not won by mathematics alone. The Vexari have conquered through intimidation for 8,000 years, she began. Their military doctrine assumes that every species will calculate the odds and surrender when they cannot win. This is logical. This is rational. And it is their greatest weakness. She walked to the central display and activated the holographic projection of the Sol system. The blue dot of Earth floated peacefully near the center. The red mass of the Vexari fleet lurked near the outer planets, like a bloodstain. They expect us to behave rationally, Nadia continued. They expect us to see their fleet, understand that we cannot win, and surrender. They have no plan for an enemy who fights anyway. Their entire strategy, their entire history, is built on the assumption that this will never happen. General Morrison crossed his arms. And what exactly do we do when we attack and they destroy our fleet in the first hour? We do not fight like they expect, Nadia said. We do not meet them in open battle. We use every advantage we have, and we make them pay for every inch of space they take. She changed the display to show a detailed map of the asteroid belt, the vast ring of rocks and debris that circled the sun between Mars and Jupiter. We convert every civilian ship we have into a weapon platform. Mining vessels, cargo haulers, passenger transports, anything that can carry a gun or a bomb. We seed the approaches to Earth with mines, not military mines, which they will expect and can detect. Improvised devices hidden in debris, in asteroids, in the wreckage of our own destroyed ships. That will slow them down, Admiral Chen admitted. But it will not stop them, no, Nadia agreed. Nothing will stop them. But everything we do costs them something. Ships, time, resources, and more importantly, it costs them certainty. She turned to face the council directly. The Vexari have never lost a conquest. Never, in 8,000 years. No species has ever truly fought them. They believe they are invincible. That belief is their power. It is what keeps their empire together. What happens when we crack that belief? What happens when every conquered species in the galaxy watches a small, primitive people hurt the invincible Vexari? Chancellor Martinez leaned forward. You are saying our resistance is a message to others. Yes, but it is more than that. The Vexari rule 1,000 worlds. Many of those worlds surrendered generations ago. Their people have lived as servants for centuries. They have accepted their fate because they believed there was no alternative. But if we fight, if we show them that resistance is possible, we plant an idea that the Vexari cannot kill with ships or weapons. The room was quiet as her words sank in. Nadia could see the calculations happening behind their eyes. They were not just thinking about the battle anymore. They were thinking about the future, about a galaxy where humanity's last stand might inspire others to rise. Admiral Chen stood and walked to the display, studying the position she had marked. The strategy requires us to sacrifice everything. Our fleet, our infrastructure, possibly our entire civilization. It does, Nadia said. But consider the alternative. We surrender and we become slaves. Our culture is erased. Our history is forgotten. Our children serve the Vexari for the rest of eternity. Or we fight, and even if we lose, we become a legend. We become the species that stood up. We become the proof that resistance is possible. General Kowalski spoke up, his voice heavy. My grandchildren live on Earth. What do I tell them? That they are going to die for an idea? Nadia felt the weight of that question. She thought about her own family, about everyone she loved who might not survive what was coming. But she had asked herself this same question 100 times already, and she had found her answer. You tell them the truth, she said. You tell them that freedom is worth more than survival. You tell them that their ancestors faced impossible odds before, and they fought anyway. You tell them that being human means refusing to accept limits that others place on us. And you tell them that if we win, if by some miracle we survive, they will live in a galaxy where no one fears the Vexari again. The debate continued for another hour, but Nadia could sense the tide shifting. Fear was giving way to something else. Not hope exactly, but purpose. The leaders of humanity were beginning to understand that surrender offered no real safety, only a longer path to the same end. At least resistance offered meaning. The final vote came just before midnight. It was not unanimous. 3 council members voted for surrender, arguing that the survival of some humans was better than the death of all. But the majority chose to fight. Admiral Chen announced the decision personally. We will reject the Vexari ultimatum. We will not surrender. We will resist with everything we have. And may God have mercy on us all. The work began immediately. Across Earth and the colonies, the call went out. Every ship capable of space travel was to be armed. Every factory was to produce weapons. Every person who could fight was to prepare. There would be no civilians in this war. Everyone was a soldier now. Nadia was given command of the resistance fleet. It was not a reward. It was a responsibility she had earned by being the one willing to say what needed to be said. Admiral Chen pulled her aside after the council adjourned. You understand what you have done, he said. It was not a question. Yes, Admiral. You may have just condemned our entire species to extinction. Nadia met his eyes. Or I may have given us the only chance we ever had. We will not know until it is over. Chen studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. I have served for 50 years. I have always believed that the purpose of a military is to protect its people, to ensure their survival. But you have shown me something today, Captain. Survival without freedom is not really survival at all. No, Admiral. It is not. Then go. Build your fleet. Make the Vexari regret the day they ever heard of Earth. Nadia saluted and turned to leave. At the door, she paused. Admiral, thank you for listening. Chen smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. Thank you for speaking. Someone had to. The next 48 hours were a blur of activity. Nadia established her command aboard the Defiance, coordinating the transformation of humanity's scattered forces into something resembling a fighting fleet. It was chaos. It was desperation. But it was also beautiful, in its way. People who had never held a weapon volunteered for combat training. Engineers who had designed luxury starships worked through the night to mount guns on cargo haulers. Scientists who had spent their lives studying the stars now calculated trajectories for missiles and mines. Everyone contributed what they could. Nadia recorded a message to be broadcast across the galaxy to every species living under Vexari rule. She sat in her ready room, alone, staring at the camera. To all species watching, she said, remember what the Vexari told you. They said resistance was impossible. They said their power could not be challenged. They said surrender was the only rational choice. Watch what happens next. Watch what humans do when we are told to kneel. And when you see us fight, ask yourself one question. If they could do it, why did we not? She ended the recording and sent it to the communications ray. Within hours, it would reach every corner of the galaxy. Every enslaved species would see it. Every Vexari commander would know that their reputation was about to be tested. The 72 hours were almost up. The Vexari fleet was beginning to move, advancing toward Earth with the casual confidence of predators who had never known defeat. They expected to find humanity broken and ready to submit. Instead, they would find Nadia Okonkwo and 300 ships crewed by people who had decided that some things were worth dying for. The 72 hours ended at exactly midnight, Earth Standard Time. High Sovereign Terex stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the small blue planet on his view screen with something close to boredom. He had done this many times before. The waiting, the ultimatum, the inevitable surrender. It was routine, like harvesting grain or collecting taxes. The humans would submit, as every species submitted, and his empire would grow by one more world. He was 4,000 years old, ancient even by Vexari standards. He had personally overseen the conquest of 11 civilizations. He remembered each one clearly. The Morvathi had wept when they surrendered. The Ketrani had cursed and threatened, but in the end, they too had knelt. The others had simply accepted their fate with quiet resignation, understanding that resistance against the Dominion was not just futile, but unthinkable. The humans would be no different. That his communications officer approached, her silver skin gleaming under the bridge lights. High Sovereign, the ultimatum period has expired. We are receiving a response from the human fleet. Terex allowed himself a thin smile. Finally, put it through. The view screen flickered and a human face appeared. Terex studied it with mild curiosity. The creature was female, dark-skinned, with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that held something he had not expected. Not fear, not resignation. Something else entirely. I am Captain Nadia Okonkwo of the Earth Combined Fleet, the human said. Her voice was calm, steady. I speak for humanity. Terex gestured lazily with one hand. Proceed with your surrender, human. I grow tired of waiting. The woman did not flinch. She did not look away. Instead, she smiled, and in that smile, Terex felt the first faint stirring of unease he had known in centuries. There will be no surrender, High Sovereign. You came here to conquer. We invite you to try. The bridge fell silent. Terex blinked, certain he had misunderstood. No species had ever refused the ultimatum. Not in 8,000 years. The very idea was absurd. You are joking, he said. I am not. Your fleet is impressive. Your reputation is terrifying. But we are not afraid of you. We are humans. We do not surrender. We do not submit. And if you want our world, you will have to take it from our dead hands. The transmission ended. Terex stood motionless for a long moment, processing what he had just heard. Then he began to laugh. It was a cold sound, empty of genuine humor. How amusing, he said. The primitives wish to play at war. Very well, signal the fleet. We advance. Destroy anything that resists. The Vexari Armada began to move. 2,000 warships, each one a masterpiece of 8,000 years of military engineering, glided forward toward the inner solar system. They moved in perfect formation, their shields glowing faintly, their weapons charged and ready. Nadia watched them come from the bridge of the Defiance. Her ship was positioned near Jupiter, hidden among the moon's shadow. Around her, scattered throughout the asteroid belt and the debris fields of the outer system, the human fleet waited. 300 ships, most of them converted civilian vessels. Cargo haulers with welded gun platforms. Mining ships loaded with improvised explosives. Transport craft stripped of everything but engines and weapons. Against the Vexari Grand Fleet, they look like insects preparing to challenge eagles. They are entering the first minefield. Lieutenant Commander Adayami reported. His voice was tense but controlled. Nadia nodded. Signal all ships. Hold position. Wait for my command. The mines they had planted were primitive by galactic standards. Simple fusion bombs hidden in asteroids, programmed to detonate when Vexari ships passed nearby. The Vexari would detect some of them. They would destroy others before they could activate. But not all. The first explosion lit up the darkness like a new star being born. A Vexari destroyer, near the edge of the fleet, vanished in a ball of fire. Before the light had faded, 3 more explosions followed. Then 5 more. Then a dozen, on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion. Terex watched in disbelief as his ships began to die. Not many, not nearly enough to threaten his force, but dying nonetheless. 2 mines, hidden in rocks like traps set by primitives. What is this? He demanded. The humans have mined the approach, his tactical officer reported. Confusion evident in his voice. They are using improvised explosives concealed in debris. Sweep them aside. This is pathetic. The Vexari fleet adjusted its formation, deploying sensor drones to detect the hidden mines. Many were found and destroyed, but the humans had hidden them cleverly, using natural debris to mask their signatures. For every mine destroyed, another found its target. 12 Vexari ships were damaged or destroyed in the first hour of advance. Then the guerrilla attacks began. Human ships burst from the asteroid belt, striking at the flanks of the Vexari formation. They did not try to engage the main fleet directly. They targeted supply vessels, communication relays, isolated scouts. They fired their weapons and then vanished back into the debris. Before the Vexari could respond, the tactics were simple, crude, almost primitive, but they were effective. The Vexari fleet, designed to fight conventional battles against enemies who stood and faced them, struggled to respond. Their massive battleships were too slow to catch the human raiders. Their smaller escorts were too few to cover every approach. Nadia led the first strike personally. The Defiance, alongside a dozen other ships, hit a Vexari carrier that had strayed too close to the asteroid field. They came in fast, weapons blazing, and retreated before the carrier's escorts could catch them. The carrier survived, but barely. Its flight deck was wrecked, its shields overloaded. Direct hit, Adayami reported, his voice mixing relief with exhaustion. The carrier is disabled. Casualties? Nadia asked, though she already knew the answer would be bad. We lost the Santiago and the Tehran. The Mumbai is heavily damaged, 2 ships gone. 50 human lives lost. For 1 damaged carrier. The math was terrible. But the math was not the point. Across the galaxy, the broadcast continued. Every strike, every explosion, every moment of resistance was transmitted to thousands of worlds. Species that had surrendered to the Vexari without a fight watched in stunned silence, as humans did the unthinkable. They fought back. The battle continued for 3 days. The Vexari advanced relentlessly, but slowly. Every kilometer of space cost them something. Ships damaged, supplies consumed, time lost. Terex grew increasingly frustrated. He had expected to reach Earth within hours. Instead, he was still fighting his way through the outer system, pestered by guerrilla attacks from an enemy he could not seem to pin down. This is ridiculous, he growled during his daily briefing. We have 2,000 ships. They have 300. Why are we still fighting? His tactical officer, a young Vexari named Sarek, hesitated before responding. High Sovereign, the humans are not fighting to win. They are fighting to delay. Every ship they sacrifice costs us resources and time. They know they cannot defeat us, but they are making us pay for every step. Then stop paying. Advance directly to Earth and destroy it. If we do that, we leave our flanks exposed. The human raiders will cut our supply lines. We could win the battle and still lose half our fleet to attrition. Terex slammed his fist against his command chair. I have conquered 11 civilizations. I will not be humiliated by primitives on the 4th day. The Defiance was hit. Nadia had led another raid, this time against a Vexari ammunition ship. The attack was successful, the ship destroyed. But a Vexari cruiser caught them during their retreat. The first shot tore through the Defiance's hull, killing 12 crew members instantly. The second disabled their main engines. Damage report, Nadia ordered, pulling herself up from where the impact had thrown her. Adayami's face was bloody, cut by flying debris. We have lost engine 2 and 3. Shields are at 15%. Hull breaches on decks for through 7. Can we still fight? We can still shoot, but we cannot run. Nadia looked at her view screen. The Vexari cruiser was coming around for another pass. It would finish them easily. She had perhaps 3 minutes left to live. She thought about her daughter, her mother, everyone she loved. Then she opened a channel to her crew. This is the captain. We are not going to survive this battle, but before we die, we are going to hurt them. All power to weapons. Target their bridge. The Defiance fired everything it had left. Missiles, railguns, even the escape pods, rigged to explode on impact. The Vexari cruiser's shields buckled under the assault. It fired back, tearing more holes in the human ship. At the last moment, just before the killing blow landed, another ship appeared. A human destroyer, the Jakarta, threw itself between the Defiance and the Vexari cruiser. It took the shot meant for Nadia's ship and exploded. No, Nadia screamed, but the sacrifice bought time. 2 more human ships arrived, forcing the Vexari cruiser to retreat. The Defiance limped away, barely alive, her crew working frantically to seal the breaches and restore power. In her ready room, alone, Nadia allowed herself to cry. The Jakarta had been commanded by her friend, Captain Yusuf Rahman. They had served together for 15 years. Now he was gone, along with his entire crew, because they had chosen to save her. She wiped her eyes and returned to the bridge. The war was not over. The Vexari were still coming, and humanity was still fighting. Earth had never looked more beautiful than it did now, hanging in the darkness like a blue jewel against the black velvet of space. Nadia Okonkwo stood on the repaired bridge of the Defiance, looking at her homeworld through the view screen. Behind her, the remnants of humanity's fleet formed a defensive line. Less than 200 ships remained from the original 300. The rest were debris, scattered across the solar system along with the bodies of their crews. And beyond them, filling the sky like a plague of locusts, the Vexari Grand Fleet approached. They had lost 47 ships during the fighting in the outer system. It was a miracle, an achievement that would have seemed impossible just weeks ago. But it was not enough. Terex had brought 2,000 ships to conquer Earth. He still had more than 1,900. The humans had hurt him. They had surprised him, but they had not stopped him. "All ships report ready," Lieutenant Commander Adayami said. His voice was steady, though Nadia knew the fear he was hiding. They all knew what was coming. "Signal the fleet," she said. "This is where we make our stand. There is no retreat. There is no surrender. We fight until we cannot fight anymore." Across the defensive line, captains and crews prepared for battle. Many of them had recorded messages for their families, knowing they would probably never see them again. Some prayed to gods they had not thought about in years. Others simply held hands with friends and waited for the end. On Earth below, billions of people watched. The evacuation to underground shelters was complete, but everyone knew that the shelters would not save them if the Vexari won. They would only delay the inevitable. So people gathered in open spaces, looking up at the sky, watching the distant lights that represented humanity's last hope. The Vexari fleet stopped just outside weapons range. High Sovereign Terex appeared on Nadia's view screen, his ancient face twisted with frustration and something that might have been grudging respect. "You have fought well, humans," he said. "Better than any species in 8,000 years. I offer you one final chance to surrender. Accept subjugation, and some of you will survive. Refuse, and I will burn your world to ash." Nadia looked at him. This creature had conquered 11 civilizations. He had crushed the hopes of countless species. He expected her to kneel, to beg, to sacrifice her people's freedom for a few more years of miserable existence. "I have a counteroffer," she said. "Leave now, and we will allow you to retreat with what remains of your fleet. Continue this attack, and we will make you regret the day you ever heard of Earth." Terex laughed, a cold and hollow sound. "You have less than 200 ships. I have 1,900. What possible threat can you offer me?" "The threat of example. Every species in your empire is watching this moment. They see what we have done. They see that the Vexari can be hurt. If you destroy us, you may win this battle, but you will lose something more important. You will lose the belief that keeps your empire together, the belief that resistance is futile." For a moment, something flickered in Terex's eyes, but then it was gone, replaced by cold determination. "Your words change nothing. All ships, attack." The sky erupted in fire. The Vexari came in waves, their massive battleships leading the charge. Human ships rushed to meet them, firing everything they had. The space between the fleets became a storm of missiles, energy beams, and exploding ships. Within minutes, dozens of vessels on both sides were destroyed. Nadia commanded from the center of the line, coordinating the defense as best she could. But coordination meant little when the enemy outnumbered you 10 to 1. The battle was not strategy or tactics. It was pure, desperate survival. The Defiance fired continuously, her weapons overheating from constant use. Vexari ships targeted her again and again, recognizing her as the command vessel. Her shields failed twice, restored by engineering miracles that should have been impossible. Her hull was punctured in a dozen places. Crew members died at their stations around her. Human ships fell one by one, but they did not break. They did not run. Captain Morrison of the destroyer Phoenix rammed his crippled ship into a Vexari carrier. Rather than eject, Captain Yuki of the cruiser Sakura fought until her vessel was literally falling apart around her. still firing with her last operational gun. Civilian transports, armed with nothing but improvised weapons, threw themselves at battleships that could have destroyed them with a single shot. On Earth, ground-based defense platforms joined the fight, missiles launched from the surface, climbing through the atmosphere to strike at the Vexari fleet. Space stations that had been built for research or commerce now served as weapons platforms. Manned by volunteers who knew they would not survive, Terex watched the battle unfold. With growing unease, he was winning. His ships outnumbered the humans by more every minute, but the cost was far greater than he had expected. His fleet had lost over 100 ships since the battle began. 100 ships against a primitive species that should have surrendered at the first demand. And the broadcast continued. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched the Battle of Earth. They saw human ships explode and reform their lines. They saw wounded vessels return to the fight rather than retreat. They saw a species that had every reason to surrender instead choose to die standing up. On the conquered world of Morvath, workers in the Vexari processing plants stopped their machines and stared at the screens. On Ketrani Prime, soldiers who had not raised a weapon in 100 years began to whisper among themselves. On a dozen other worlds, the same question formed in the minds of beings who had accepted their fate long ago. If the humans can fight, why did we not? On the Defiance, Nadia realized that her ship was dying. The damage was too severe. They had perhaps minutes left before the hull failed completely. She thought about ordering an evacuation, but there was nowhere to evacuate to. The escape pods would just be target practice for the Vexari. All hands. She announced over the ship's intercom. This is the captain. The ship cannot survive much longer. But before we go, we have one last duty. Target the Eternal Dominion. If we are going to die, let us die swinging at the king. The crew cheered. It was madness, pure and beautiful madness. The Defiance turned toward Terex's flagship. Engines straining, weapons charging for one final shot. Then, at the edge of the system, something appeared on the sensors. Captain, Adayami said, his voice shaking with disbelief. We are detecting new ships entering the system. Over 300 of them. Nadia stared at the display. The signatures were not human. They were not Vexari either. Identify them. The computer worked for a moment, then displayed the results. Nadia read them twice, certain she was hallucinating. Ketrani Confederation vessels. 320 ships. They are broadcasting on all frequencies. The message filled the bridge, transmitted in the universal language that all spacefaring species understood. This is Admiral Corax of the Ketrani Confederation fleet. We have watched your fight, humans. We were your enemies once. Now we choose to be your allies. The Vexari told us resistance was impossible. You have proven them wrong. Today, we stand with you. Before Nadia could respond, more ships appeared. 200 vessels bearing the markings of the Morvathi Trading Guild. 100 more from the Selix Collective. 50 from the Draven Compact. Species that had been conquered or intimidated by the Vexari for centuries were emerging from hiding. Joining the battle, Terex saw the same displays. His face went pale. Impossible, he whispered. They surrendered. They all surrendered. But the impossible was happening. Across the galaxy, the broadcast of humanity's defiance had done what 8,000 years of Vexari rule could not. It had given other species hope. And hope, it turned out, was contagious. The combined fleet, human and alien, now numbered over 1,000 ships. The Vexari still had more, but the advantage was shrinking, and more reinforcements were arriving every minute, drawn by the broadcast, by the example, by the simple truth that one species had shown them. Resistance was possible. Nadia opened a channel to the allied ships, tears streaming down her face. Thank you, she said. All of you. Thank you for standing with us. Admiral Corax's voice replied, rough with emotion. Thank us later, human. For now, we have a battle to win. The arrival of the allied fleets changed everything. High Sovereign Terex stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, watching his tactical displays with something close to horror. What had been a certain victory was becoming something else entirely. His fleet still outnumbered the combined enemy forces, but the gap was closing. More ships arrived every hour. Species that had been silent for centuries suddenly finding their voices. His advisors urged him to attack immediately, to crush the resistance before it grew any stronger. But Terex had not lived for 1,000 years by being foolish. He understood what was happening. This was no longer a battle for one small planet. This was a battle for the soul of his empire. Every conquered species in the galaxy was watching. If he destroyed Earth and its allies, he might win. But the cost would be devastating, and the victory would prove nothing except that the Vexari could be made to bleed. Other rebellions would follow. Other species would rise. The empire that had stood for 8,000 years would begin to crumble. But if he retreated, the damage would be even worse. No one would ever fear the Vexari again. He was trapped. The humans had done what no species had ever accomplished. They had made him choose between two kinds of defeat. On the Defiance, Nadia Okonkwo watched the standoff with exhausted eyes. Her ship was barely holding together. Her crew was running on nothing but determination and the last of their coffee supplies. But they were still alive. Against all odds, against every calculation, they were still alive. Admiral Korax of the Katrani fleet contacted her privately. His scaled face filled her view screen, ancient and tired, but burning with something like joy. "Captain Okonkwo, I have waited 100 years for this moment." Nadia managed a weary smile. "I am glad we could provide the opportunity. You do not understand what you have done. My people surrendered to the Vexari when my grandfather was a child. We believed we had no choice. We believed resistance was suicide. You have shown us that there are worse things than death. What happens now?" Korax was silent for a moment. "That depends on you. The Vexari are calculating. Terex knows he cannot win without losing everything. He will offer to negotiate." As if summoned by the words, Nadia's communication officer reported an incoming transmission from the Eternal Dominion. She accepted the connection and found herself face to face with High Sovereign Terex once more. He looked older than before, somehow. The confidence that had radiated from him just days ago was dimmed. In its place was something she had never expected to see in a Vexari's eyes: uncertainty. "Captain Okonkwo," he said. His voice was controlled, but the strain beneath it was obvious. "This war has cost both our peoples greatly. I propose a ceasefire." Nadia did not respond immediately. She let the silence stretch, knowing that every moment reinforced the reality of what had happened. The mighty Vexari Dominion was asking for terms from a species they had dismissed as primitives. "I am listening," she finally said. "The Dominion will withdraw from the Sol system. In exchange, humanity will agree to a non-aggression pact. We will not interfere with your world. You will not interfere with ours. The conflict ends here." It was a remarkable offer. Just weeks ago, the Vexari had demanded unconditional surrender. Now they were willing to accept a stalemate. For Earth, it was victory beyond anything Nadia had dreamed possible. But it was not enough, no. She said. Terex's expression shifted to confusion. "No, you cannot be serious. I am offering you peace, survival, everything you fought for. You are offering me Earth's survival. That is not what we fought for." She stood from her command chair and walked closer to the view screen. Ignoring the protests of her aching body, "We did not fight because we thought we could win. We fought because surrender was worse than death. We fought because freedom cannot be bargained away. And we did not fight alone." She gestured at the displays showing the allied fleets that had come to humanity's aid. "These species joined us because they saw what we showed them. That resistance is possible, that the Vexari can be challenged. If I accept your offer, what happens to them? They return to their chains? They pretend this moment never happened? What they do is not your concern. It became our concern when they risked everything to stand beside us. I will not betray that." Terex's face hardened. "Then what do you want?" Nadia took a breath. What she was about to demand would sound like madness. Perhaps it was madness, but she had come too far to accept anything less. "I want freedom, not just for Earth, but for every species that wishes it. The Vexari Dominion will release any world that chooses independence. No more conquest, no more subjugation. The empire ends." The silence that followed lasted for a full minute. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominion, Terex stared at the human woman on his screen and tried to understand how he had come to this moment. How a species that should have been crushed in the first hour of contact was now demanding the dissolution of everything his ancestors had built. "You cannot enforce such terms," he finally said. "Even with your allies, you do not have the strength to destroy us." "No," Nadia agreed. "But we do not need to destroy you. We only need to make your empire ungovernable. Every world you try to hold will rise against you. Every conquest will cost you more than it gains. You can fight us forever if you choose, but you will never win. The idea we have planted cannot be killed with ships or weapons." She leaned forward, and her eyes met his across the vast distance of space. "The galaxy is watching, High Sovereign. They have seen what happens when one species stands up. They will never forget. You can accept change gracefully, or you can be destroyed by it. The choice is yours." The negotiations lasted for 3 days. In the end, Terex agreed to most of Nadia's demands, not because he had to militarily. His fleet could still have won if he had been willing to sacrifice everything. But the cost would have been the destruction of the very empire he sought to preserve. Better to accept a diminished dominion than preside over its total collapse. The treaty was signed aboard a neutral station, witnessed by representatives of every species that had joined the alliance. The Vexari would withdraw to their original territory, the core worlds they had held before their expansion began. Any conquered species that wished to claim independence would be allowed to do so. The age of dominion was over. Nadia signed for Earth, her hands steady despite the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. When it was done, she stepped back and looked at the assembled representatives. Ketrani, Morvathi, Selix, Draven, and a dozen others, all watching her with expressions that ranged from disbelief to something approaching reverence. Admiral Korux approached her. "Captain Okonkwo, I do not have words for what you have accomplished. We accomplished it together," she said. "All of us, perhaps, but you showed us it was possible. You gave us back something we had lost so long ago that we had forgotten it existed." "What was that?" "Hope." The years that followed were not easy. The Vexari Dominion did not collapse overnight. Some worlds chose to remain under Vexari rule, preferring the stability they knew to the uncertainty of freedom. Others struggled through the chaos of building new governments and new identities. There were conflicts, setbacks, tragedies, but there was also progress. Species that had been enslaved for centuries rediscovered their cultures, their languages, their dreams. Trade flourished between the newly independent worlds. Old enemies became allies. A galaxy that had been ruled by fear slowly learned to be governed by cooperation. And at the center of it all, remembered and honored by every species that had found its voice, was the small blue planet that had started everything. 20 years after the battle, an old woman stood before a memorial on the grounds outside Earth Command. The memorial was simple, a wall of names listing every ship and crew member lost in the war. At its base, carved in stone, were the words that had become humanity's legacy. They chose to stand. A young cadet approached her hesitantly. "Captain Okonkwo, may I ask you something?" Nadia turned. Her hair was white now, her face lined by time and responsibility. But her eyes were still the same, still holding that spark of determination that had inspired a galaxy. "Of course. Why did you do it? You knew we would probably lose. You knew Earth might be destroyed. Why did you fight anyway?" Nadia looked at the memorial, at the names of friends and comrades she had never stopped mourning. Then she looked back at the young cadet, at the future she and so many others had fought to make possible. "Because freedom that can be taken away was never really freedom," she said. "We did not fight to survive. We fought to live. There is a difference." The cadet nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but sensing the truth in her words. Nadia smiled and put a hand on the young woman's shoulder. "Remember this when you take your oath. Remember what we showed the galaxy. Not that we were strong or clever or powerful. We were none of those things. We were just stubborn enough to believe that some things matter more than survival." She looked up at the sky, at the stars that humanity had once dreamed about and now traveled freely among. "That is what it means to be human, and that is why we will never be conquered again." The sun set over the memorial, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. The names on the wall seemed to glow in the fading light, honored and remembered.